It's the 28th of the 7th, 2016. The year is really ripping away on us. And this is Brian, doing a catch up on all things. There's a lot going on in the world, isn't there? There's a lot to make commentary about. Not that I want to do that, but I have been thinking quite seriously about a few issues. And I'm still thinking about the myth of the globe, because it's become quite clear to me that the globe is a myth, and I'm not exactly sure what the Earth really looks like. I mean, in its entirety, but it seems to me the Earth is very flat. Of course, there are mountains, but the horizon indicates there are no curves. And I've looked at many horizons, believe you me. So other people are doing scientific examinations of what the Earth really looks like. It seems that we cannot trust what comes from NASA. I think the number of artificial constructs that are coming out of NASA is just amazing. And as soon as the flat Earth starts getting a bit of publicity, NASA starts pumping out stuff about how it's got a satellite on a mission to Mars or some other place. And I just find it interesting that as soon as the flat Earth gets a bit of the upper hand, or starts getting up in the light, should I say, NASA feels it has to kick back with more of this mythology of space and the globe and space travel. Because, of course, it seems to me there's good grounds to argue that we haven't got outside of the dome yet, and probably a good thing too, actually. I'd hate to think what would happen if we smashed through the dome, even though it seems to me there is evidence that the nuclear tests were some kind of attempt to figure out what the dome really was. And I mean, that's really insane when you think about it. If, for example, the only thing between us and extinction is the firmament, why on earth would you want to smash it to pieces? So, yeah, that just shows you how collectively unhinged we are. Well, whether people were thinking about the consequences, and I certainly didn't hear anything as the nuclear tests were going on when I was younger. It was definitely just a scary thing, we were going to be all destroyed by radiation. Then there was some, more recently, some guy saying that aliens have come here and that they're able to soak up radiation. Now, I'm just actually having a problem recalling that guy's name. He was the chap who pioneered the whole thing about being able to see into other dimensions. The CIA used him, or no, the American Army used him for some reason. He managed to fool them into. However, he had a sort of an elaborate explanation about what aliens really are. Chuck Missler refers to them, and I think he's right. I think Chuck's right, as interdimensional beings. That we don't have aliens, we just have interdimensional beings. Yeah, so that gets us down to this issue that I found quite fascinating. This is the division between the secular and the religious, the sacred and the profane. That it has arisen, really, as a consequence of the amazing amount of activity during the Enlightenment period, when the autonomous man really asserted himself and struck out against the whole notion of heteronomy. That is a universe under the control of God. Of course, autonomous man believes that he's in charge. He's his own lawmaker, and he's, if you like, the centre. Man is the centre of all things. Well, that's an interesting way to subvert things, but from a, and I guess I am saying this, I am definitely saying this from an orthodox, conservative, Judeo-Christian position of which I grew up in, so I mean there's no getting away from it. They had me until I was 7. However, I think the evidence from my position weighs heavily in favour of the Judeo-Christian position because of the number of sensible theologians and philosophers that have made commentary in that direction that I feel is compelling and convincing. But however, so we got this dualism, and I think the thing that we probably missed is that behind all evil acts is a personality. Now, which and who is that personality? Well, the Judeo-Christian position is that's the work of the original rebel, Lucifer, who took 1/3 of the angels with him. Interesting how the whole idea of an angel seems to evoke a range of imagery, which I think to some ways is quite inaccurate. So, I mean, if you read the Bible, you'll see that angels are described quite carefully. And I mean, for one, Daniel, when he was confronted by an angel, was absolutely terrified. So, I mean, this is a big being, a very tall being, and from what we are told in the Bible, angels can be very powerful. I mean, the ability to destroy can never be underestimated. So anyway, that's a big, rich and colourful reality that not everybody shares. It's just the way it is. People have actually shut the theological or religious out to the point where I think the current Pope seems to be of the opinion that we are more secular than ever, and that the church, with the typical Aquinian dichotomy, needs to be in the evangelical chariot, preaching and converting to the Neo-Aquinian view of the universe, New Aquinas' view of the universe. Well, it's just a restating, really. Let's face it, the new Pope is in a small group of people expecting that an alien is going to come breaking through the dome or the firmament, but they're not talking about it like that, but from outer space through the Van Allen belts, which is another curious phenomenon as well, because if you ask people about the Van Allen belts, very few people understand who Van Allen is or what the Van Allen belts really are. So one of the problems you're going to have now is finding people who have read enough to be able to actually understand what you're talking about. That's one of my problems on this, on these subjects, is that ability to connect different positions and observations that people have made is very limited. I mean, let's face it, we know the world via two ways, from what has been recorded, whether it's in books or on the internet, or someone else actually says to you, look, this is how it is, and how you actually experience it with your eyes. And of course, these two get muddled up. So sometimes what we're seeing is really what other people have told us we see. It gets complicated. I'm going to be the first to admit it. And that's one of the problems that philosophy has had to deal with, and hasn't done a very good job, because, of course, what philosophy does is it starts with the assumption that you, starting from yourself, as Plato said, man is the measure of all things, that we can measure everything, but we're finite. And We're insufficient basis to build a unified field of understanding. God is the one who knows reality. I'm not sure how much we can ever really know of it. It's a whole another issue. What we get is our constructs of reality, our social, our theological, our philosophical, our anthropological constructions, and dare I even say, included in that, our scientific constructions of reality. So, it sure is a big chop suey that you're operating with. Yeah, excuse me while I just have a sip of this cup of tea. That's very good. However, after 63 years, I suddenly realised that there were some questions that I should have been asking and I had left unattended. Well, I did have other things to think about. As a youngster, I got interested in social change, riding motorcycles, writing poetry, looking at the nonsense that came out of Hollywood, meeting people, talking and so forth. And, life becomes filled up often with trivia and repetitive activity. And, of course, the great repetitive activity we all have to endure is we have to go to work and be slaves to the Pharaoh. And that takes up a lot of our time, so we don't get much time to think, and as a consequence we all, many of us, operate as if we have no heads at all. Another reason to demand that the retirement age be put back to 60, because, is there any time in one's life where you could be paid to actually sit around and think about the real issues and the special issues and the consequential issues that, we're confronted with? I'd be in favour of everyone being paid a living wage, actually, so that we could have huge numbers of philosophers and theologians and thinking people. But as it is, we're all just basically being educated to think more about less. And that's a tragedy, because, we only get one shot at this. And, that's a very serious problem. We're not coming back for a second run. I just received an email from a very interesting chap called Os Guinness, who's actually a Christian apologist. I think he wanted to be a preacher, a theologian, an evangelist, but in a strange sort of way, he does a very good job of all those things with his apologetics. He wrote this really interesting book called The Dust of Death that I was first confronted with way back in 1976, which is when I first met Os Guinness. He kindly agreed to have a lunch with me and my partner in London in a park after we'd gone to a church service at All Souls. At that time, I think Oz was attending All Souls, which a wonderful church in London, and I think the one of the resident ministers there was a chap called John Stott, who's written lots of books on books on apologetics, on the Christian position from a conservative, dare I say, I think evangelical, but one has to be careful the way we label things, position. So Oz was kind of like somebody who went to L'Abri, which was a community run by Francis Schaeffer. I've been there myself. And he sort of shook it up a bit, I think, really. a very interesting guy because he has quite a wide breadth of social and cultural insight. And if I'm correct, his mentor was Peter Berger, a sociologist. I like Peter Berger because he's an interesting fellow, and he has insights that we need to listen to. I think we need to listen to him anyway, because as far as I'm concerned, Peter Berger makes a lot of sense. Anyway, you can actually Google Peter Berger, the sociologist. Yay! Excuse me. Yeah, so there are heaps of New Agers discovering the flat Earth, but they are doing it, I think, in some ways, many of them, or, well, numbers of them, are disconnected from the theological roots of the flat Earth, because we are first told about the flat Earth in the Bible and through the Book of Enoch, and various other, and Luther and Calvin staunchly opposed the work of Copernicus, who really was actually a bit of a trickster. And going back to how we ended up with the sun at the centre, rather than the earth, which is the footstool of the Lord, the footstool of God, God above the firmament, his dwelling above the firmament, to this planet, Earth, circling around the sun at 64,000 miles an hour, spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. The whole thing is the biggest nonsense going. And on top of that, to make it all work, Newton had to formalise the whole thing. So he gave us gravity, another complete nonsense. And when you think about it, if there is no gravity, there's no possibility that they could stay on the moon. Not that they even got there. I mean, it's just the technology of the time and the evidence that demands a verdict on the side of not getting to the moon. Believe you me, it's all there if you want to have a look and think about it. And but somehow, we just don't do that level of thinking. We never have. There are very few thinkers, very few truly educated people, heaps of so-called educated people, and I know one manipulation after another, one political intrigue after another. So that's where we are at the moment, and the political intrigues have not stopped. But I really like what I heard this morning about how the role of hair in politics is really up there now, Boris and Donald, with their hair, Hillary with hers. And one thing I really liked is this woman that was making commentary about Boris and Hillary's. She said that she didn't really like either of them. So, and I guess that's where I'm at too. I don't like Hillary and I don't like Don. And I thought, but Boris, I thought, he was highly amusing and a very clever chap. I'm not sure about Don being clever. He's streetwise, but I'm not quite sure about his level of sophistication. And Hillary, she's a work. She's far too sophisticated for me. Okay, right, over and out.